listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's expert webinar series. Today's presentation is entitled Workplace Kindness and Gratitude, and it will be presented by Chester Elton. He's a employee engagement and leadership expert at the Culture Works. We would like to thank everybody for coming today. My name is Tom Provine. I'm the marketing coordinator here at AccountantsWorld, and we thank you all for joining us. Just a couple of tips before we get started with the presentation. You will see here a graphic of your attendee control panel. You can use the orange arrow to expand and hide the panel. With your audio options, you can expand the audio section to choose telephone or computer speakers. And if you're interested in asking any questions, whether it pertains to the presentation or pertains to any technical issues that you may be having, please do so in the questions tab there at the bottom, and we will be monitoring that throughout the presentation. There will be one free CPE offered for today's webinar. What are the three things that you need in order to get CPE? Well, you need to attend the webinar for no less than 50 minutes. You need to attend the webinar for no less than 50 minutes. Respond to all of the polling questions and submit the post-webinar survey within 24 hours after the webinar has ended. And you will be receiving your CPE in the next 3 business days. And if there's anything else that I need to do, add webinar@accountantsworld.com to your trusted email list.
Hey Tom, this is Sharon. You're getting a lot of feedback on your microphone.
Okay, no worries. Alrighty, is that better?
No, we're still getting feedback, and they're saying I have feedback also.
I'm not sure what the reason is. I will get right into the presentation and introduce Chester Elton then. He is one of the most influential voices in workplace trends and employee satisfaction. And he's a New York Times best-selling author. So without further ado, Chester Elton.
Great. Delighted to be with you here today. You're going to send me so they can see my screen. You're going to send that over to me, Tom? Excellent. Show my screen. Let's jump up here. Take this down. You'd think we'd done this before, wouldn't you, Tom? Excellent. Delighted to be with you here today to share 3 big ideas about how to make your workplace more kind. And thank you for that kind introduction, Tom. You know, I wanted to add to that, since we're going to wrap up our 3 big ideas with recognition and appreciating people you work with. Adrian and I just got back from Toronto over the weekend. There was a Global Gurus Award ceremony, and Adrian and I were recognized as top 30 gurus in both leadership and organizational culture. So I thought I'd throw that into my resume because my mother's not here to brag about me. So that was a big event in Toronto for us. Well, let me talk to you a little bit about these 3 big ideas to make your workplace more kind. And one of the reasons Adrian Gostick, my co-author, and I have been taking a deep dive on this is because of all the negative publicity, all the negative news that you're hearing about online bullying. There was just a report that came out today on Instagram, how more than 50% of all the kids on Instagram felt at one time or another bullied. You know, the stress in workplace, we'll get into some of the statistics. And we took a look and said, well, what happens when you have a kind workplace? What happens when you have a more appreciative, a workplace full of gratitude? Are there, tangible and measurable business results? And that's what we want to share with you here today. Well, again, there's my photo. I won't turn on my webcam. That's exactly what I look like. So we have a poll question coming up, and I'm going to shoot that back to you, Tom, to kick things off on how you feel about the kindness at your workplace. So you want to throw that up on the screen for us, Tom?
Sure thing, Chester. Just give me one second here. Okay, and our first.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, and our first poll question today: if you had to rate the overall kindness of your workplace, how would you describe it? Very kind, somewhat unkind, or very unkind?
So let me put you on the spot, Tom. At Accountants World, where would you rate the kindness of your workplace? Understanding that your boss is probably listening to this.
I would rate it as very kind. I find that we have a very kind workplace here.
Good answer. Good answer. I think though, as long as you've worked, if you've worked for any period of time, you've been either on a team or found in a situation where you felt like the workplace was not very kind. So how are we tracking? Are we getting some good responses?
We are. About 95% have voted. So we will do just a couple more seconds here, and we will close the poll.
There you go.
And let's share those results.
Look at that.
So about
almost 50% find it kind, 42%. So that's almost 90% find it a kind workplace, which goes against the trend, by the way. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And we feel bad for the 3% there. Well, let's go ahead and get back to the presentation here. So we've done a lot of research around creating appreciative workplaces. We published that research in our book, The Carrot Principle. What were the elements of a high performance culture? We published those findings in our book called All In. What motivates me was all about employee engagement, defining the key motivators. And then our last book, The Best Team Wins, we took a look at 850,000 engagement surveys plus 60,000 of our motivators assessments to say what were the key elements of high performance teams. Well, it's really interesting. We talk about old school and new school. Old school is leaders are tough, right? It's called work for a reason, Tom. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be effective, and that's why we call it work. Lead by fear. Look, that's where you get immediate results. Put the fear of God in those people. They tend to be more authoritarian, right? Top down, very structured. Need to know basis as far as information in the organization goes, and you're never going to need to know. Somewhat abrasive. I remember working for a leader. He said, you know what? To be successful here, you got to sharpen your elbows. I'll never forget that expression. Sharpen those elbows, Chester. It's a matter of survival. Well, so it begs the question. Well, if that's kind of old school and seems to have worked for a few generations, why kindness? Fascinating study. It was a global campaign done by Oxford University just last year. It was called the Sincerely Kindness Challenge. And it was this simple. People were challenged to do one act of kindness every day for 12 consecutive days. And then they wanted to monitor, their feelings around that. So really interesting. It was done in several countries, 39 to be exact. And they wanted to see if you had these random acts of kindness, would it increase your levels of happiness and life satisfaction? Well, here were the results. Number one, that kindness begat trust. Isn't that interesting? In the workplace, in your life, when you're kind, it engenders trust in other people. Now, Tom, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here a little bit. Why would you think that would be the case? Why, if people are kind to you, do you tend to trust them more?
Well, I think it makes everything just a better relationship among your employees, among your friends, among your cohorts. You tend to gravitate towards that person, and gravitation towards that person sort of enables some level of trust.
Yeah, the message is I care about you. Right?
Yes.
I'm being kind to you. You're important to me. I care about you. And of course, you can take the opposite of that. When people are mean to you, do you trust them? Well, no, because you don't think that they care about you. They don't have your best interests at heart. They're just mean. So it makes perfect sense, right? Leads to stronger work performance. Again, when you trust your immediate supervisor, when you feel like your immediate supervisor, he or she cares about you, or your teammates care about you, it leads to stronger workplace performance. And this was fascinating. It actually made people more healthy. That when stress levels go down, sick days go down. When trust goes up, anxiety goes down, and you actually have a healthier workplace. You know, it's really interesting. I want to share a story with you. I had a really good friend in sales up in the Northeast. We won't use his name to protect the innocent. He literally had such a toxic relationship with his supervisor that while he was making a presentation to a customer, he actually stroked out. He actually had a stroke. And luckily, he was downtown in a major metropolitan city. They rushed him to the hospital. He fully recovered. He asked his doctor, he said, you know, I exercise, I eat well. So they started to talk about his workplace environment, lack of trust, a feeling that his immediate supervisor was consistently unkind to him. And his doctor literally said, you have to quit your job. Your job is killing you. That was the determining factor. So it makes sense, right? Stress goes down, health goes up. Now, this might be a resource or an, you know, someone that you might think, well, this isn't someone I would normally think of being kind, but Mark Cuban from the Dallas Mavericks, you know, Shark Tank guy, talks about kindness this way. One of the most underrated skills in business is being nice. Nice sells. I went through my own metamorphosis. Early in my career, I was bam, bam, bam. And that's the Mark Cuban you hear the most about, right? Just hard hitting, you know, AAA personality. He says, I curse, I get mad. I wouldn't have wanted to be in business with me when I was in my 20s. I had to change, and I did, and it really paid off. I love when he says, you know, nice sells. We want to deal with people that are nice. We want to deal with people that are kind. Well, here's our next poll question. So I'm going to throw it over to you, talking about turnover in the workplace. It's all yours, Tom.
Terrific. Thank you, Chester. Let me just open up that poll question real quick. And once again, folks, these poll questions are required for CPE credit. So let's open this up. And our second poll question: how many people have left your immediate team within the last year? None, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or more than 5. So once again, these questions are required for CPE. And again, folks, I want to apologize for the audio issues earlier. It seems to be that we have got those rectified. Okay.
So Tom, why do you think we go to turnover as being able to calibrate kindness in the workplace?
Well, I think with regards to kindness, I think we want to work with people who are in general pleasant to be around. But I think another thing, and this is for myself, I'm what they would call a millennial. I'm 27 years old. I think that a lot of millennials want to find some sort of purpose in their work. And when they don't find that sort of purpose in their work, aligned with that kindness and gratitude in the workplace, it makes them want to leave and want to move on to greener pastures, or what they think are greener pastures.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think, you know, it's interesting in the research we've looked at, more and more people are looking for impact in the workplace. You know, am I making a difference? Am I learning, growing, and developing? Well, particularly that second area of personal growth, you know, learning and development. If you don't have a supervisor or a company that cares about that, you're less likely to care about them. And that's where you tend to have some turnover. So how are we doing on the responses?
We have 96% that have responded, so I'll just give people a couple more seconds here. Going once, going twice, and we will close the poll. And let's share those results.
Look at that, almost half have had no turnover in the last year. More than 3%, 3 to 4. You know, isn't it interesting that 3% of the people on the webinar also said that they worked in an unkind workplace. And here we're seeing 3% show up again in having the highest turnover. So one of the ways you can take a look and say, do we have a healthy workplace, is you do look at turnover, where people are happy and engaged, feeling like they make a difference, having a good rapport with their immediate supervisor. they do tend to stay. Well, here are the three big ideas that we wanted to talk to you about. First and foremost, we want to talk about understand what motivates each other. In a healthy, engaged workplace, this idea of not just understanding what we're good at or who we are, understanding what really motivates each person on the team. What really motivates, what are you passionate about? So I love to ask the question, how do you think things would be different? How do you think productivity would look if you knew what motivated each member of your team? So again, you've probably taken like a Myers-Briggs, that's who I am. You've taken Strength Finders, maybe from Gallup, what I'm good at. The reason we developed our little motivators assessment was that what we felt was missing is what are you passionate about? And it was really interesting, Tom, because we found that in many cases, what people were really expert in wasn't necessarily what they were passionate about, that they had other things that they did that fulfilled that passion. Well, I think this is really well illustrated in a story. I got to know Coach Billy Lovett a few years ago. I was mentoring some kids in East Orange, New Jersey. Nice town, it's got some rough areas, and that's where Billy worked. Head coach of the East Orange Campus High School Jaguars. Well, one of the kids that I was mentoring was the point guard for that basketball team, Jeffrey Duveston. Number 3 in your program, Tom, but number 1 in your heart, right? And Billy was great about not just coaching these kids, mentoring these kids, make sure they would graduate. Every one of his players actually went on to college. Many of them first in their family to do so. So we would go to the games to cheer on Jeffrey, and over the course of time, we'd get to know Coach Lovett. So we're at this away game, smaller gym, right? And games going on. I'm a big sports fan, played a little basketball as a kid. So I'm watching the game. I don't see anything that's gonna miss when Coach Lovett launches himself out of his seat, calls a timeout, grabs one of his star players. And I'm telling you, Tom, just starts screaming at this kid. I don't care if you never score another basket, if you don't get back on defense, if you don't get back on rebounds, you're never going to see the floor again. I mean, small gym, everybody can hear every word he's saying, right? Get to the end of the bench. You'll be lucky if you see the floor again today. And I'm thinking, wow, that was pretty severe. Well, game progresses, calls another timeout, pulls over his, 3-point shooting sniper, right? Aaron. And he says, Aaron, look, you're a bit off. I'm going to sit you down, take your time. Going to need you in the fourth quarter. Going to give you a bit of a rest. You're going to come back in. You're going to be great. Well, after the game, I grabbed the coach and I said, hey, coach, I couldn't help notice the difference in the way you treated those two kids. The one kid, you tore his face off. The other kid, you gave him milk and cookies. They were both underperforming. Is that fair? And it was really interesting, Tom. He looked at me and he smiled and he said, Chess, you got to know your players. You got to know your players. So we looked at this 850,000 people survey to take a look at that. And you know what? It was really interesting. He said, if I had not screamed and yelled at the first kid, that's all he understands. He's a knucklehead. And by the way, when he put that kid back in, was ripping down rebounds, playing better than he ever had. He said, if I had treated Aaron the same way, he's a tender soul. It would have crushed him. Not only would he have not, made another basket, I wouldn't have seen him in practice the next day. So he says, know your players. So in the survey, what we really looked at is we said, well, what helps people feel energized, enabled, and engaged in their work? What is it that makes people want to quit their jobs? And what are the factors that increase or decrease job satisfaction and motivation? So great case study I want to share with you. Diane Weed, vice president at Wendy's, been in the fast food industry for 30 plus years, right? Knows all about it. Well, most of her direct reports were like you, Tom, they're millennials. So we have this kind of generational difference, right? So what we did is we took Diane Weed, you can see her ranking there on the left. We took her top 7 motivators, which are her most impactful, and her bottom 3, which of course are her least motivating. And we did the same thing with her entire team. So it's really interesting. If you take a look, learning for Diane is fairly low. She'd been in the business, 30 plus years. Look at where learning ranks for her direct reports. Very high. Most of the millennials, where we find that impact, learning, and family tend to be very, very high on the motivator scale. So as we took a look at the team, she said, well, how can we better relate to each other? And her team said, well, look, you know all this stuff. Why don't you share it with us? Why don't you mentor us? Why don't you bring in some reports, or maybe we can talk to customers or customer surveys. We can look at a vendor come talk to us, maybe some white papers, from the industry publications, which wasn't a problem, because if you take a look at her fifth motivator right there, developing others, very high. Well, you can see once she understood what really motivated her team and they made a slight adjustment, they were able to really increase trust, increase learning, increase engagement. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? And so you'd say, well, does it work the opposite ways? Absolutely. Look at this. Diane, pressure, very high. Loves pressure. No time to get her done. Give me the assignment. I'm your gal. Employee number 8 was her least motivating. Look at that pressure. They weren't getting along. They didn't know why. And it was really interesting. After we did this case study, employee number 8 literally said, this exercise saved my job. You see, she loved what she was doing in the industry she was in. She just didn't like who she was doing it for. Now, many of you that are on the webcast here know that the number one influencer of employee engagement is the relationship with the immediate supervisor. She had a poor relationship because of the pressure issue. They weren't sure what it was. They just know they didn't get along. Once they could identify it and make a few subtle changes, it made all the difference. So, Tom, as you're looking at this, does this resonate with you?
I would say so, yes. I think one of the, looking at what employee two's impact points are, the teamwork portion and the challenge portion are two that really ring out to me. I know for myself, I like to be able to work within the confines of a close-knit team, but I also like the challenges of being able to try new things, that are out of my comfort zone. So maybe having something to do with this would definitely be interesting. And I think it could work across any industry.
Right. Well, we talked about kindness in the workplace, and the poll numbers were actually very good for the people on the webinar. Interestingly enough, the Conference Board in New York, a nonprofit that measures global engagement, said that 85% of the world's workplace is disengaged. So just over 8 out of every 10 employees register themselves as disengaged or actively disengaged. And I guarantee you that the vast majority of those have a poor relationship with their immediate supervisor. Well, kind of interesting. So you see pressure here on employees 6 and 9. They're getting along great, right? So understanding what motivates your employees, I like to sum it up by saying, do you know your players? Do you know what those key motivators are? And do you know how to manage those to best effect? Second one, share everything. These transparent, open, and honest workplaces. So it's really interesting. The best cultures are places of truth, constant communication, and transparency. Again, old school was very hierarchical, very top down, guarding information jealously. Things are on a need to know basis. Here's an interesting statistic. We did a lot of work with the Michigan Health and Hospital Association. That's the hospital group associated with the University of Michigan. The top driver of engagement was, my voice is heard. In other words, if I've got an idea, if I've got an opinion, I've got a listening ear, right? And the engagement scores increased it from 20 to 50% when employees believed that their opinions mattered, that their voice was heard. Now, Tom, I want to pull you into this conversation. You've worked long enough here. Have you ever had a workplace where you felt like your opinions didn't matter, where your voice wasn't heard?
Yes.
And how did that impact your attitude around your work and your relationship with your supervisor?
It made me want to quit, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, if they disregard what you're saying, or in some cases, where you've got this bullying, where you're made to feel foolish, well, that's a crazy thing. You don't understand, Tom. This is accountants world here now. We have a certain way that we do things, right? And that's not it. You mentioned earlier, you kind of like to step outside your comfort zone. Would you feel safe stepping outside your comfort zone if you felt like your opinions didn't matter?
I certainly wouldn't.
Absolutely not. So it seems common sense, right? The point is it's uncommonly practiced. So
Now, Chester, real quick, if I can interject, one question that somebody had, Gary Zune, how close are these Michigan results to that of other industries?
Great question. There's the increase in engagement was a little higher. What we did find in the research that we looked at is there was always at least a double-digit increase. So, depending on the industry, the range could be anywhere from, usually the increase is somewhere around 20 to 30%. The 50% was particularly high. And we looked at that and said, is that because of the urgency around healthcare? And that was the one thing we thought could be an accelerator in that, when you're talking about people's health and whatnot, having your opinion heard when there needs to be maybe an extra blood test or you need something that's an emergency. So it was a little higher. Great question, though. You're 20+% increase in engagement when people feel like their voice is heard. So thank you for the question. Are there any more?
Yeah, Gary had another question earlier regarding what metrics do you use to handle stronger performance thereabout?
Every organization is going to have their own matrix on performance. Some of it is going to be, would you refer us to another customer or family or friend? Others, it's very straightforward in sales. It's number of sales closed. Others, it's going to be customer satisfaction. So, depending on what industry you're in or the department you're in, those measures of performance are going to vary. So it's hard to give you just a blanket answer on that. Okay. Let's move forward. So we thought we'd give you a couple of tools here today. One that we call the transparency diagnosis. Ask yourself, do I withhold information, right? Am I keeping everybody in the loop in everything we do? Do I value diversity of opinion and encourage team members to weigh in? In other words, am I crowdsourcing on my own team, right? Do I have hard conversations? This was a particularly interesting one. When you look back at managers that you felt were really good, that you loved to follow, that made a difference, I guarantee you they had tough conversations with you. So often we look at hard conversations as being a negative. It's not. When you've got trust, when you've got a manager that you believe in, that you believe has your best interest at heart, those hard conversations actually increase engagement. We're going to get into this in the third big idea, this idea of do I give credit where credit is due? We did a really interesting survey and asked, how did your manager break trust with you? One of the most common answers was, when my manager took credit for my work, I trusted he or she less, which kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Do I help create an environment where it's safe to be truthful? This has been really an interesting dynamic, particularly with all the different movements about, is it safe to speak up when you see, behavior that's should be unacceptable or unethical? Is it safe to be a whistleblower? Is it safe to tell the truth about why we really lost that customer and so on? Again, if you don't feel safe, you're not going to speak up. Do I have teammates that keep me in the dark? Often we say, look, this is just a manager issue. It's not. It can be with your teammates. Who do you trust? Who can you cheer for? Who are you not cheering for? Who are you wary around, and who are you completely honest and open with? And lastly, are there people on my team I would not share everything with, and why not? I think this is a great qualifying question. If you've got somebody on your team that you won't share information with, what does that say about your relationship? What does it say about your trust levels? What does it say about that person, that they cannot be trusted with the information on the team? I think that those are great questions. I know this is downloadable. It's a great little format. It's a great little diagnosis for, how are you and your team doing? Poll question. I'm going to shoot it back to you, Tom.
Thank you so much. Let's get the third poll question up right now. All right, let's launch that. And the poll question reads, when it comes to workplace recognition, how would you rate your organization? Above average, average, or below average? And we are getting people coming in and voting right now.
Excellent. And I would say on this, sometimes we think of recognition as being like the stuff and the awards. What we've looked at is when we ask people about, their most fond recognition moments, right? They would talk about simple things, going to lunch with the boss, getting a handwritten note, time, and so on. So it's really interesting how different people will interpret recognition differently in the workplace. So let me ask you, Tom, what was the greatest recognition you've ever received in your career that was most meaningful to you?
Well, I mean, I'm an Eagle Scout, so that was nice to have that recognition when I was coming out of high school. That was pretty sweet.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think one of the things that it's never the big awards, like you said, having your boss or supervisor or somebody that and work with send you an email of congratulations or say, good job on this. That's more rewarding the day to day as opposed to, end of year awards, good job, that sort of thing. At least in my opinion.
Exactly. Well, and that's very common. And it is interesting that we tend to spend a lot of time putting together these elaborate recognition programs and whatnot. If they don't include those softer skills, those softer, encounters, I think you lose the opportunity to really express gratitude in a meaningful way. Well, so are we all in for the voting?
Yes, we're about 92% in here. Let me just close the poll and let's share those results. All right, so it looks about 57% said average when it comes to workplace recognition. Do you think that's the same?
It's really interesting. Whenever I look at average, I envision people going, yeah, we're okay. We're not great, we're okay. Below average, 16% is a little low in most of the surveys we've seen. Above average, this is actually pretty good. Usually it's around 15%, and the below average is a little over 20. I think average is meh, right? We're okay. We're not great, but we're okay. Well, in this next section, we want to give you the opportunity to really take a look at some best practices around recognition and how we cheer for each other. It's really one of my favorite areas because I think this is where we talk about, in particular, emotional engagement, right? In the best cultures, teammates encourage each other daily and leaders recognize employees frequently. You talked about, the simple things, the little day-to-day stuff. I always laugh when I say, well, tell me a little bit about recognition where you work. They go, oh man, we have this incredible year-end banquet. I mean, open bar, music, it's incredible. Now, the other 364 days of the year are living hell, right? But I hang on for that year-end banquet, right? No one would ever say that. The day-to-day stuff makes all the difference. So as we take a look here, whoops, there we go. Wanted to share with you some best practices at Zappos. Lots been written about their unique culture. And Adrian and I had the chance to tour their workplace, their call center and warehouse just outside Las Vegas. And it's fascinating the way they celebrate little victories and little wins along the way. Now, as you might guess, and you look at the photo, everybody's got a headset on. So you can't like scream and yell because people are on the phone, right? So they developed this really cool little recognition thing they do called SNAPS. Now it's actually an acronym. So Tom, I'm gonna say, what do you think SNAPS stands for? Does anything come to mind? I'll be shocked if you get it, by the way.
It sounds like a poetry reading when you say snaps, like snaps for the speaker or something like that.
Exactly, like the coffee houses in the 60s, right? If you ever saw the movie Honey, I Married an Axe Murderer, right? So SNAPS actually stands for super nifty and positive stuff. And when somebody does something great, that's what they do. They snap for each other and they laugh and they giggle. It's one of many, many things they do that's part of their culture. It gives them permission to celebrate. Now, you may have your own, ways of doing that. Maybe it's a rubber chicken, right? Or it's, we had one company, they had a Walk the Talk award. And the CEO had these big chattering teeth on legs, and you'd wind it up, and these chattering teeth would walk. It was a dime store kind of thing, and yet people were thrilled to get the Walk the Talk Award. Another company that made me laugh, they had this old G.I. Joe, this old action warrior, and they called it the You the Man Award. So when you did something great and you were the man, that you got the G.I. Joe award. So it can be silly, it can be fun. I'm always amazed at how meaningful it is to people to get these just fun little words that let you know, hey, I'm cheering for you, right? We're having fun here at work. So what are the basics? The basics of great recognition are do it now, do it often, be specific, be sincere, right? So do it now. The important thing to remember around recognition is recognized behavior gets repeated. And the closer the recognition is to the behavior, the more likely it is to be repeated. And I want to say that again. The closer the recognition is to the behavior, the more likely it is to be repeated. When you think about sports, right? If you win the Super Bowl, when do you get the trophy? You get it now, or Wimbledon, or the Olympics, or the Stanley Cup, right? Or cricket, world cricket, right? Now, Tom, skill testing question for you. In football, whether it's a bowl game or it's the Super Bowl, the winning players do this weird thing for the coach. What is it?
They pour Gatorade on him.
They pour Gatorade on him. Do you think the coach enjoys that?
I would if I won. I know my Philadelphia Eagles did in 2017 when they won the Super Bowl. Not a big deal or anything.
Absolutely. People say, oh, the coaches must hate that. I said, you're kidding. The coaches love that because it means they won. Now, I always thought it would be funny if they did it for the losing coach. You're like, hey, wait a minute. Hey, we lost and I'm all sticky, right? So yeah, and they do it right away. They don't wait till 2 weeks later when they see the coach at the mall, right? Poosh. So think about what are people doing now? Recognize it now. Don't wait till the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month, or the end of the year. Primacy, recency. It's about messaging. And when you do something great and I recognize you right now, that means that it's valued. It's important because I do important things right now. Well, little things you can do to make it often. Handwritten notes. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, do a text or an email, right? That's immediacy, right? I will say though, that handwritten notes, people don't do it anymore. And so when people get a handwritten note, it means all that much more. A letter to the family to thank them for, the long hours you've been working. A team huddle where you call somebody out. Do somebody's least favorite task. Give up a parking space closer to the entrance. Maybe a cup of coffee or take somebody to lunch. Or there was really an interesting company in New Jersey. It was a tech company where once a year, the CEO and the senior execs would come down and wash the employees' cars. The message is, hey, we don't have a company without you. We're here to serve you. And Tom, I always thought it would be funny that if you could call your CEO back and say, hey, boss, you missed a spot on the hood. We're all about quality here. So have fun with it and do it often. It's the little things that happen during the day. It's not just the year-end banquet. And be specific, right? Do you know how your employees or your teammates want to be recognized? Do they want time off? Do they want to work on a new product launch? Do they want to go to a conference to improve their skills, right? If you're going to write down one thing, write down that general praise has no impact on people. Like literally, if you're showing up and saying, hey, great job, great job, great job, no impact. Nobody cares. Be specific. Saw what you did with that customer. Really appreciated the way you worked through that problem and recognize them in a meaningful way. There's nothing worse than sending a big bottle of champagne to an employee who's a recovering alcoholic, right? Or a honey baked ham to a devout Jewish family, or a turkey to the vegan family, right? You say, well, it's the thought that counts. Well, clearly you didn't give it much thought, right? Or you would have done a better job. So be specific in your praise and make sure you're recognizing people in a way that's meaningful to them. And then lastly, be sincere, reward those behaviors you truly value. Is it staying late? Is it, coming in to fill in for somebody else's shift who couldn't make it in because of bad weather? Is it on-time delivery? Is it quality? Is it innovation? And make sure when you're giving that recognition, you tie it back to those core values. Simple little things. Now, I have a challenge for you. back to the handwritten note. I challenge you, if you'll write 3 notes a week for the next 3 weeks, you'll be shocked at the impact it has on people, whether you leave it on their desk or in their cubicle, or you put a stamp on it and you mail it to their home. And do more than just say, hey, great job, Tom, Chester. Tell them exactly what they did right, the value or goal, tie it back to your core values, how it impacted the team or a customer or your industry, and that sincere appreciation. It just doesn't take that long, and you'll be shocked at the impact it has on people. So that's my challenge. I know it's old school. I'm not saying you shouldn't do those other things. Add this to your list and you'll be shocked. I'd love to ask people as you type in, how many of you have received a handwritten note? And how many of you kept it? And why? And we can discuss that if you want to chime in. How many of you received a handwritten note? How many of you kept it? And why? Well, I want to share a great story with you. This is our friend and partner, Paul Yoakum. He found this on the web, and it's really interesting. It was eBay. This older gentleman found a VHS player that he wanted to purchase. The reason is he'd found this big old box of VHS tapes that no one had ever looked at. And he took the time to write this letter to the guy that sold it to him. And I just want to read it because I think it's so sweet. He said, dear so-and-so, I found many old VHS tapes recently and wanted to see what was on them. And I realized I had no player. So I went to eBay for the first time and discovered your offer. I bought your VHS and you shipped it within a few days. The VHS looks new and unused. Amazing. I had some issues getting it going, which were mine and not the player. I'm 86 and perhaps not up to my game, but I did get there eventually. And I did, and discovered the VHS works perfectly. Thank you so much for your care, your efforts, and your promptness. And this is where it gets great. I watched tapes of my retirement party from 25 years ago, which I had never seen before. We were young. Then a tape of my wedding with all family and friends, many of which are no longer around. And then skiing trips, kids growing up, travels, and most importantly, the gentle maturing of my family. Each one more fun than the last, all thanks to your generous selling of the VHS player. I thought you would appreciate how much someone has enjoyed your offer. Best regards. Paul found this heartfelt thanks, sent to a guy who sold him a VHS player, which I'm sure he was eager to get rid of, and it made all the difference. Well, Paul posted this. I think he got like 750,000 views or something, and numerous comments about there are so many little things that go right in our lives, and sometimes we just forget to say thank you. So who's done something nice for you lately? Did you drop them a note? Did you say thank you? Did you cheer for them, whether it was at work or your personal life? Because you know what? I think the world needs a little more kindness. I think the world could benefit from just a little more gratitude. Well, those are the 3 things that we're sharing with you. Understand what motivates each other, share everything, root for each other. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And it's just a fun offer. If you would like to take the assessment with your team and do like we did with Wendy's, we'll offer you a free motivators profile. We've got a great little, what we call portal. You get everybody in your team to take it. We can organize it for you into the top motivators, moderate motivators, and neutral motivators. And you can have the discussion with your team. What motivators do we have in common? What do we have that are unique, that add to the diversity of our team? And where do we have areas of disconnect? Like we saw on the Wendy's profile. So just drop us a note, Chester@thecultureworks.com. Pretty simple, Chester@thecultureworks.com. I'm happy to set that up for you if it's something you'd be eager to sample with your team. Well, again, that motivators profile report, actually, don't send it to me, send it to Lance, Lance@thecultureworks.com. And he'll get you all the details and get you all set up. Thank you, Lance. One last story as we close, and then we'll get to your questions. When we wrote our book, The Best Team Wins, we studied a really interesting character who was the commander of the International Space Station, Chris Hadfield. He's the guy on the right there. And he had everything that modern teams have challenges with, right? Multi-generational, there was 31 years difference between the youngest and the oldest astronaut. Cultural, Chris is Canadian, he had 2 American astronauts, 3 Russian cosmonauts, difference in language, culture, food preferences, and so on. And it was really interesting. They were 5 months up in the International Space Station. One of the most successful and most productive 5 months in the history of NASA. So I asked Chris, I got to meet him at a conference in Southern Alberta. And I said, well, what was the difference? Why was your team so productive as opposed to the other teams? And he said, look, we were really smart. We were well prepared. We obeyed all the rules, because if you don't, it's space, you're going to die, right? All those movies, well, we're going to break the rules. No, you don't. Nobody breaks the rules. Space is very unforgiving. He says, and so we were smart. We were well prepared. He says, I'm convinced, though, the reason we had so much success was we had one unwritten rule, and it was this, that every member of the team had to perform one random act of kindness for every other member of the team every day. Back to that, sincerely kindness challenge, right? One random act of kindness every day for 12 days. Well, they did it for 5 months. And I said, why did that make such a difference? He said, think about it. It was never anything big. It was, I'll clean up. Let me help make dinner. Let me help you with those calculations. I know you're not feeling great. I'll take that shift. He said, the message was very clear that you're important to me. I've got your back. I'm cheering for you. You are valuable to this team. I love you. And he said, because of that, we never had heated arguments. No one ever lost their temper. We knew that we cared about each other, and we expressed it every day in a random act of kindness. Tom, isn't that amazing? All the things that you think about, right? All the things you think about, all the systems, all the processes, right? It was the human touch, the softer skill that made a difference. What do you think about that, Tom? Is it the little things that make a big difference in your life, in your career, that let people know that they care about you?
Yes, I would agree. I think that, like I said before, the little moments of recognition are important. I also think that having, time away and little pieces of your time away from the workplace is also very important. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. You're an Eagle Scout, and 2 of my boys were Eagle Scouts. So I know exactly. So what's the Eagle Scout motto, right? A good deed daily. So what was a good deed that you performed on your way to Eagle Scout that was particularly memorable? And don't say I helped an old lady across the street, because that's too cliche.
What was a good deed?
Yeah, a random act of kindness, you as a scout.
You're taking me way back. My goodness, almost 10 years. I think the one thing that I was very good at is bringing people together, because I have a pretty gregarious personality. So bringing everybody together for meetings and just being kind of the call person to call people down into troop functions. I think that was something that I was very good at, and I think it was good. I was good at amping people up and getting them into what we were doing and whatever activities we were doing.
Excellent. You're the cheerleader. Perfect. Perfect. Well, I know we wanted to save some time for some questions. We've got about 10, 12 minutes. 3 big ideas that make your workplace a little more kind. I hope it was helpful for you. I am a big believer in random acts of kindness. I've never been on a team that was a high performance team where we didn't cheer for each other and where we didn't care about each other. Those seem to be the common threads. I want to share one last thought with you. Adrian and I have been studying leadership for, almost 20 years now. And the difference between the good leaders and the extraordinary leaders was always their soft skills. Isn't that interesting? They had great hard skills. They were competent. They knew the industry. They had great CVs, right? They had great resumes. The difference was always the soft skills. And think about the leaders that you were most willing to go the extra mile for. I guarantee you had a great relationship. You cared about them because they cared about you. Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking.
Terrific stuff, Chester. Real quick, we had a question again from Gary asking if you had met the Zappos founder, CEO, Tony C., I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Hope so. Chester, you still there?
Actually, Tom, we lost your audio too. I think we lost my audio. Hi, folks. I think we had some more audio problems here again. Give me a second, Chester. Can you try maybe resetting your microphone under the audio tab? Just change it to no audio and then go back to your audio preference. That seemed to help for me.
Okay, Sharon, I can hear you.
Yep, Tom, and you're back. Do we have Chester? No, we're still having some technical issues with Chester's microphone. Sorry about that.
Okay, folks, we're going to finish the presentation here today. So I'm going to switch the presentation over to myself here. All right. And want to thank you all for joining us. Our next presentation will be on CAS from Zero to Profit in 90 Days, presented by Hitendra Patel. That will be on July 31st at 2 p.m. Hitendra is the Director of Practice Development here at AccountantsWorld. We really look forward to this presentation. Hitendra is a leader and thought leader in CAS, and we hope that you will join us for that.
And guys, if you're not familiar with what Chester, we've got Chester back. Welcome back.
So sorry. I hope I didn't miss anything important. By the way, I know Hitendra, and he is wonderful. That's going to be a great webinar.
Yeah, I was just about to say that if you're not familiar with what CAS stands for, it's Client Accounting Services. And it's something anyone in working with small business accounts should be thinking about. If you're not offering client accounting services, you need to attend this webinar.
All right. We want to thank you, everybody, for coming today. We will finish up here. Chester, thank you again so much. And we look forward to seeing you folks at Hittendra's webinar on the 31st.
Wonderful. Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I hope this made your day a little kinder and a little more full of gratitude. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.